An elderly man died at Christmas without a will. When his greedy granddaughter claimed the inheritance, she was stunned to discover that. When Charles Anderson passed away on Christmas Eve, his granddaughter Sarah, a successful New York executive, thought inheriting his small-town bakery would be a simple business transaction. She couldn't have been more wrong. A missing will, mysterious documents, and a web of hidden connections would reveal that her grandfather's true legacy was far more valuable than any inheritance she could have imagined. This heartwarming story reminds us that sometimes the greatest fortunes can't be measured in dollars and cents, and that Christmas miracles come to those who believe in something bigger than themselves. The snow was falling gently on Christmas Eve in Millbrook, Maine, as Charles Anderson made his way up the worn stone steps of St. Mary's Church. At 78, each step took a little more effort than the year before, but Charles wouldn't miss Christmas Eve service for anything. He'd been coming to this same church for over 50 years, ever since he opened his first bakery across the street. Inside, the familiar scent of pine and candle wax brought a smile to his weathered face. As he settled into his usual pew, Father Michael caught his eye and nodded warmly. Charles closed his eyes, thinking about the day ahead and the legacy he'd built. Not the chain of successful bakeries that everyone in town knew about, but the invisible web of kindness he'd carefully woven through the community over the decades. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Sarah again. His granddaughter had been calling all week about some national chain wanting to buy Anderson's homemade breads. Charles declined the call with a heavy heart. Sarah was so much like him in some ways, determined, sharp as a tack. But somewhere along the way to becoming a successful New York executive, she'd lost sight of what really mattered. After the service, Charles headed straight to the main bakery. The warm, sweet smell of cinnamon and fresh bread wrapped around him like an old friend as he pushed open the back door. Inside, his staff was already hard at work preparing the Christmas baskets, a tradition as old as the bakery itself. "Morning, Mr. A." Thomas, his head baker of 30 years, called out from behind a tower of bread loaves. "We're right on schedule. 200 baskets, just like always." "Make it 250 this year, Thomas," Charles said, watching the surprise spread across the baker's face. "Times are tough for a lot of folks." "But sir, with the new equipment costs," Thomas started. Charles waved away his concern. "Some things are more important than the bottom line, son." He spent the morning overseeing the basket preparation, sneaking extra cookies into each one when his staff wasn't looking. His phone buzzed again, a text from Sarah this time. "Grandpa, please be reasonable. Breadline Enterprises is offering 3 times market value. We need to discuss this before the new year." Charles sighed, typing back. "Some things aren't for sale, sweetheart." He added a heart emoji. Sarah had taught him how to do that last Christmas. As the afternoon wore on, Charles felt more tired than usual. Martha, his trusted manager and younger sister, noticed him rubbing his left arm. "Charles, maybe you should sit this one out," she suggested as the delivery van started pulling up. "Let us handle the distribution this year." "Nonsense," he replied, though he did take a moment to rest in his old leather office chair. "Martha, promise me something. Whatever happens, protect what we've built here. Not the buildings or the business, the heart of it, the real legacy." Martha's eyes welled up. "Charles, don't talk like that." "Promise me, sister." "I promise," she whispered, squeezing his hand. Charles insisted on seeing off each delivery van, checking every basket one last time. As the winter sun set early over Millbrook, he settled back into his chair, watching the snow through his office window. He thought about Sarah, about the letter he'd written her that was tucked away in his desk. Maybe he should have told her everything, but some lessons had to be learned firsthand. The pain in his arm was worse now, but Charles felt strangely at peace. He closed his eyes, thinking of all the Christmas Eves in this office, all the lives touched, all the quiet acts of kindness that had made everything worthwhile. His last thought was of Sarah, and a prayer that she would someday understand what he'd tried to teach her all along. When Martha found him an hour later, Charles Anderson was still sitting in his chair, a gentle smile on his face, finally at rest on the night he loved most. Christmas Eve. The executive returns, Sarah Anderson stared out the plane window as it descended into Portland International. Next to her, Jack Thompson was still talking about market valuations and asset liquidation, but her mind was on the phone call she'd missed from her grandfather last night. "This could be huge for your career," Jack said, straightening his tie as they landed. "A successful transformation of a family business into a corporate asset? The partners will eat it up." Sarah nodded absently, checking her phone. 3 missed calls from Aunt Martha. Her stomach dropped as she listened to the voicemail. Charles Anderson had passed away on Christmas Eve. The drive to Millbrook was silent. Even Jack seemed to sense she needed space. As they pulled into town, Sarah noticed the closed for mourning signs on every Anderson's bakery window. The main store, where her grandfather had started it all, was surrounded by flowers and cards. Inside, Aunt Martha was coordinating funeral arrangements with a quiet efficiency that reminded Sarah painfully of her grandfather. Their greeting was stiff, formal. They hadn't spoken much since Sarah's last attempt to convince Charles to modernize the business. "He went peacefully," Martha said, her voice tight. "In his office just after the Christmas basket deliveries." "Of course he did," Sarah said. Of all the nights to go, it would be Christmas Eve. Her grandfather had always been dramatic that way. Jack stepped forward, extending his hand. "Jack Thompson, Riverside Capital, I'm so sorry for your loss. When Sarah's ready, I'd be happy to help with the business transition." Martha's expression cooled noticeably. "I wasn't aware we needed help with any transition." Throughout the day, a steady stream of employees and townspeople came to pay their respects. Sarah was struck by how many people had stories about her grandfather. Not just about his bread, but about quiet moments of kindness she'd never known about. Thomas, the head baker, talked about how Charles had paid for his daughter's medical bills. Eleanor, the elderly secretary, mentioned something about a safety deposit box full of important papers. Sarah filed that information away for later. "Your grandfather was more than just a businessman," Robert Chen, the local restaurant owner, said pointedly. "He understood what community meant." Sarah bristled at his tone. "I grew up in this community too, Mr. Chen. Did you? Haven't seen you much since you left for that fancy New York job." Before Sarah could respond, Martha called everyone's attention. They'd found no will in Charles's office or home. As his only grandchild, Sarah would inherit everything by default. "We need to review the books immediately," Jack whispered. "The sooner we can start the transition." "Not now," Sarah cut him off, watching Martha's face. Her aunt was holding something back, she could tell. Later that night, after Jack went to the hotel, Sarah stayed behind at the bakery. In her grandfather's office, everything was exactly as he'd left it, even his reading glasses still perched on a stack of handwritten ledgers. She picked up a framed photo from his desk, herself at 16, helping him decorate Christmas cookies. "Why didn't you just tell me what you wanted for the business?" she asked the empty room. Martha appeared in the doorway. "Because he knew you had to figure it out for yourself." "Figure what out?" "Why he turned down every offer to sell. Why he kept everything in these old paper ledgers. Why the Christmas baskets mattered so much." Martha paused. "But maybe you're not ready to understand yet." Sarah felt a flash of anger. "I understand business, Aunt Martha, and this business needs to change with the times." "Is that what your friend Jack thinks?" "Jack's just here to help." Martha shook her head sadly. "Your grandfather saw this coming, you know. That's why he—" She stopped herself. "Never mind. It's late. We have a funeral to plan." As Sarah drove to her hotel, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important. Everyone seemed to know something about her grandfather that she didn't. But she was here to honor his legacy by making sure his life's work survived in today's market. She just wished she could shake the memory of his last text message. "Some things aren't for sale, sweetheart." Unexpected obstacles. The morning after the funeral, Sarah walked into the main bakery ready to take charge. Jack had prepared a detailed transition plan, and she was determined to start implementing changes immediately. First order of business, she announced to the assembled staff. "We need to digitize all records and modernize our systems. I'll need access to all accounts and documents." Thomas, who had been pulling fresh bread from the ovens, stopped mid-motion. "Maybe we should wait a few days, out of respect." The best way to respect my grandfather's legacy is to ensure this business survives, Sarah replied. Now, where are the main financial records? Martha cleared her throat. That might be a problem. Many of the important documents seem to be missing. Missing? Jack stepped forward. What exactly is missing? Partnership agreements, vendor contracts, certain financial records. Martha shrugged. Your grandfather had his own way of organizing things. Sarah felt a headache coming on. How did this place even function? Quite well for 40 years, Thomas said quietly. He untied his apron. If this is the direction we're going, maybe it's time for me to retire. Thomas, wait, Sarah said, alarmed. She couldn't lose her head baker, not when potential buyers would be evaluating the business. Nobody's retiring. We just need to modernize some things. Her phone buzzed. Her boss in New York. Sarah, we need you back by Monday. The Jensen merger won't wait. I can't leave yet. There are complications. Handle them remotely. That's why you have Thompson there. Sarah ended the call and turned to Jack. What are we missing? This should be straightforward. Jack was frowning at his laptop. According to these partial records, the bakery's been operating at a loss for years. But that's impossible. The revenue numbers don't match what we estimated. Dad always said numbers don't tell the whole story, Martha commented. Numbers are exactly what tell the story, Jack insisted. And these numbers don't add up. Throughout the day, more problems emerged. Key suppliers claimed they had special arrangements with Charles that weren't documented. Several employees mentioned profit-sharing agreements that weren't in any contract. Even the Christmas basket program seemed to operate on some mysterious parallel budget. This is a nightmare, Sarah told Jack in her grandfather's office. How did he run this place? Like a charity instead of a business, Jack replied. But we'll fix that. First step, suspend all unusual expenditures until we sort this out. You can't do that, Martha said from the doorway. There are commitments. Not without documentation, Jack cut in. Sarah noticed Martha exchange glances with Thomas. Something was going on. That afternoon, Thomas approached Sarah while she was reviewing old invoices. Your grandfather used to say that bread feeds the body, but kindness feeds the soul. That's nice, Thomas, but it doesn't help me understand these books. Maybe you're looking for the wrong things. He hesitated. That chain store making the offer, they'll fire half the staff, won't they? They'll offer severance packages. Thomas nodded sadly. I've been here since I was 16. Your grandfather gave me a job when no one else would hire a high school dropout. Said everyone deserves a second chance. He headed for the door. Just something to think about while you're looking at those numbers. By evening, Sarah was frustrated. Nothing made sense. The computer system was ancient, files were missing, and everyone seemed to be hiding something. We need to move faster, Jack insisted. Every day we delay, the business loses value. But Sarah kept hearing her grandfather's voice. Some things aren't for sale. She found herself staring at an old photo on the wall, her grandfather teaching a young employee to braid challah bread. The employee was Thomas. Her phone buzzed again. Another deadline, another pressure. But something held her back from giving Jack the go-ahead to proceed with the sale prep. In the empty bakery, surrounded by the fading scent of fresh bread and decades of history, Sarah felt like she was missing something important. Something that couldn't be found in spreadsheets or profit margins. She just wished she knew what it was. Secrets in the bank. Sarah was reviewing another stack of incomplete records when Eleanor poked her head into the office. Oh good, you're here, the elderly secretary said. I've been thinking about the missing papers. Did you check your grandfather's safety deposit box at First Millbrook Bank? Sarah looked up. What safety deposit box? The one he visited every month. I assumed you knew about it. Jack, who had been typing on his laptop, immediately closed it. I can go check that out for you, Sarah. No, Sarah said quickly, surprising herself. I should do this myself. The local bank was exactly as Sarah remembered from her childhood. Mr. Peterson, the manager, recognized her immediately. I'm so sorry about Charles, he said. He was a good man. I need to access his safety deposit box. Peterson's face grew serious. Of course, we'll just need to verify the paperwork. In the vault, Sarah sat alone with the large metal box. Her hands shook slightly as she inserted the key. Inside, she found stacks of letters, photos, and newspaper clippings. The first letter was from a local high school student. "Dear Mr. Anderson, I can't thank you enough for the college scholarship. Mom cried when I told her. I promised to make you proud." Another was from the director of the local orphanage. "Your monthly contribution has kept our doors open. 20 children have a warm bed tonight because of you." Photo after photo showed graduates in caps and gowns, new small business owners, families in front of new homes. Each had a note attached detailing how her grandfather had helped. Sarah's vision blurred as she found a familiar image. Her grandfather's beloved 1965 Mustang. The sale receipt was attached, along with a bank transfer to Sarah's college fund. She remembered him saying he'd got a good deal on the car. "He never told you, did he?" Sarah jumped. Father Michael stood in the doorway of the vault. About what? About any of it. The scholarships, the loans, the helping hand he extended to so many. The priest smiled sadly. Charles believed true charity should be quiet. But how? The bakery's records show barely any profit. Perhaps profit wasn't his main concern. Father Michael paused. "You know, he talked about you often. He was so proud of your success, but he worried." "About what?" "That you'd learned how to price bread but forgotten how to value it." Sarah stared at the pile of letters. Why didn't he just tell me what he was doing? "Some lessons can't be told, Sarah. They have to be discovered." Back at the bakery, Jack was waiting impatiently. "Did you find the missing documents?" "No," Sarah said, "just some old papers." She couldn't bring herself to tell him what she'd really found. Instead, she went looking for Martha. "The safety deposit box," Sarah said. "You knew about it." Martha nodded. Charles had his reasons for keeping certain things private. Like the fact that he sold his prized car to pay for my college? Among other things, Martha hesitated. "Sarah, there's something you should know about the bakery's finances." Before she could continue, Jack burst in. "Sarah, we have a problem. I've been reviewing the books, and there are serious irregularities. We need to act fast before this affects the sale value." Sarah looked at the worry on Martha's face, then down at the scholarship thank you letter she'd slipped into her pocket. "Give me until tomorrow," she said. "I need to understand something first." After Jack left, Sarah sat in her grandfather's office, reading letter after letter as the sun set over Millbrook. Each piece of paper revealed another thread in a tapestry of quiet generosity she'd never known existed. Her phone buzzed with another message from her boss in New York. For the first time in her career, she didn't immediately respond. Instead, she found herself wondering what other secrets her grandfather's legacy held, and why he'd chosen to keep them hidden for so long. The web of kindness. Sarah stood outside St. Mary's orphanage, still processing what she'd found in the safety deposit box. Sister Margaret greeted her at the door. "You're Charles Anderson's granddaughter," the nun said. "We've been expecting you." Inside her office, Sister Margaret pulled out a folder. "Your grandfather's monthly contributions kept this place running for the past 15 years. 15 years? Sarah glanced at Jack, who was checking his phone outside. "The bakery's books don't show any regular charitable donations." "Oh, he didn't do it through the bakery. He brought cash every month, along with fresh bread for the children." Sister Margaret opened a photo album. "Look at these kids, all grown up now. That's Dr. Mike Peterson. He runs the clinic downtown. And Jenny Martinez just passed the bar exam." "Dr. Mike? The same Mike who used to deliver our bread? Your grandfather gave him a job when he was 16, paid for his college application fees too." Sister Margaret smiled. Charles had a way of seeing potential in people. Sarah's phone buzzed. Her boss again. She ignored it. At the clinic, Dr. Mike was between patients. "I wondered when you'd come by," he said. "Your grandfather changed my life. Tell me." "I was a kid with no prospects. Parents gone, living with my aunt. Charles hired me as a delivery boy, but he did more than that. He taught me about responsibility, dignity, the importance of helping others." Mike paused. "Did you know he set up a small scholarship fund for local kids?" Back at the bakery, Sarah confronted Martha. "How many secrets did he keep?" "You haven't even scratched the surface." Martha pulled out an old employee contract. "Look at this closer." Sarah read it, then read it again. "Profit sharing? Every employee owns shares? A little piece of the business. Charles believed everyone who helped build it should benefit from its success." Jack burst in. Sarah, we need to talk. I found major discrepancies in the accounts. The business is hemorrhaging money. Is it? Sarah looked at Martha. Or are we just not seeing the whole picture? Numbers don't lie, Jack insisted, and these numbers spell disaster. Sarah's mind raced. The scholarships, the donations, the profit sharing. How had her grandfather managed it all? A knock at the door interrupted them. Robert Chen, the restaurant owner who'd been cold to her at the funeral, stood there. I heard you were asking about your grandfather's community work, he said. There's something you should know. Over coffee at his restaurant, Robert explained how Charles had saved his business during the recession. He didn't just extend my credit at the bakery, he co-signed my bank loan, helped me renegotiate my lease, said a town needs its gathering places. Why are you telling me this now? Because I judged you too quickly. Robert met her eyes, and because there are dozens more stories like mine. That evening, Sarah sat with the employee contracts, studying the profit-sharing clauses. Her phone lit up with texts from Jack about urgent decisions needed for the sale. Martha brought her coffee. You know what Charles used to say about business? What? That profit isn't just what you take out, it's what you put back in. Sarah thought about Dr. Graham, Mike saving lives at his clinic, Jenny Martinez defending the underprivileged, the orphanage still caring for children. The books, she said suddenly, the missing documents, the cash donations, the shared ownership. He built it this way on purpose, didn't he? Martha nodded. Charles knew that someday someone might try to dismantle what he'd built. He made sure it wouldn't be easy. Sarah looked at her phone. Another message from Jack about the sale evaluation. For the first time, she wondered if they were evaluating the wrong things, and she was beginning to understand why her grandfather had kept so much hidden for so long. The perfect system. Sarah spread dozens of papers across her grandfather's desk, trying to make sense of it all. The handwritten ledgers, which she'd initially dismissed as outdated, were starting to reveal their secrets. It's all here, she muttered, connecting the dots. We've been reading them wrong. Jack looked up from his laptop. What's wrong? Not wrong, different. Sarah grabbed a ledger. Look at these entries. They're not expenses, they're investments. Every donation, every scholarship, every loan, he tracked it all. That's still money leaving the business, Jack said. No, look closer. When he helped Robert Chen's restaurant, their bread orders doubled. The scholarship students' families became loyal customers. It wasn't charity, it was community building. Martha appeared with more books. Charles called it his parallel accounting. It's brilliant, Sarah said. He kept 2 sets of books, one for the tax office showing normal business operations, and these tracking the real impact. Jack frowned. That sounds illegal. No, Martha interjected. Everything was reported correctly. He just found creative ways to reinvest the profits before they hit the bottom line. Sarah's mind flashed back to a conversation from her college years. She'd just finished her first business class and was explaining profit maximization to her grandfather. That's one way to look at it, he'd said, handing her a cookie. But what if the profit isn't meant to be maximized? What if it's meant to be optimized? I didn't understand then, Sarah said, but he wasn't running a bakery, he was running a catalyst for change. Her phone buzzed. The CEO of Breadline Enterprises wanted to discuss the acquisition. Sarah let it go to voicemail. This changes everything about the valuation, Jack argued. We can't sell a business that's deliberately minimizing profits. Maybe that's the point, Martha said quietly. Sarah opened another ledger. A note fell out in her grandfather's handwriting. Remember, bread rises because it's full of air. A business rises because it's full of people. She thought about her own college fund, now understanding where it really came from. Not from selling the Mustang for profit, but from selling it to invest in her future. The Christmas baskets, she said suddenly. Show me those records. Martha brought another book. Inside, Charles had meticulously tracked every recipient, every referral, every connection that grew from the annual tradition. It's a network, Sarah realized. The baskets weren't just gifts, they were introductions. People who received them became customers, then hired scholarship students, then grew their own businesses and helped others. Jack stood up. Sarah, I know you're emotional about this, but remember why we're here. The partners are expecting. I need air. Sarah cut him off. She grabbed her coat and headed outside. In the cold evening air, she walked past the bakery's front window. The space where her grandfather's Mustang used to park was empty. She'd always thought he'd sold it because he needed the money. Now she understood. He hadn't needed the money. He'd needed to invest in something more important. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her boss. "The partners want an answer by tomorrow," he said. "Are we moving forward with the sale?" Sarah stared at the bakery's warm windows, thinking about all the lives shaped by her grandfather's quiet investments. "I need more time," she said. "We don't have more time." "Then that's going to be a problem." She hung up and walked back inside, where Martha was waiting. "Ready to learn how it really works?" her aunt asked. Sarah nodded, finally understanding that she'd been asking all the wrong questions. The real books weren't about hiding money, they were about tracking hope. Echoes from the past. Sarah was searching through her grandfather's office for more ledgers when she found the diary. It was tucked behind an old family photo, leather-bound and well-worn. "I shouldn't," she hesitated, but opened it anyway. The first entry was dated 40 years ago. "Bought the bakery today. Everyone says I'm crazy starting a business during a recession. But people will always need bread, and this town needs hope." Jack walked in as she was reading. "The bank called. They're concerned about the business's debt ratio." "Give me a minute," Sarah said, turning the page. "First day open," she read. "Sold out by noon." Mrs. Peterson said it reminded her of her mother's baking. "Tom Jenkins couldn't pay for his loaf. Told him he could work it off helping me fix the windows. Saw something in that kid's eyes. Maybe he needs more than just a few hours' work." "Sarah, we need to talk about the sale," Jack insisted. She ignored him, lost in her grandfather's words. Year 1, the next entry read. "Tom's now my full-time apprentice. His mother cried when he got his GED. Taught him how to make sourdough today. Kid's a natural. Business is tight, but we're making it. The bank manager suggested raising prices. Told him some things matter more than margins." Martha came in with coffee. "I see you found it." "Did you know about this?" Sarah held up the diary. Charles wrote in it every week, said it helped him remember what mattered. Sarah flipped forward several years. Recession hitting hard. 3 businesses closed downtown this month. Robert Chen's restaurant struggling. People say I'm crazy extending him credit, but his place matters to this town. Besides, his daughters need somewhere to do their homework after school. Margaret at the orphanage says they're cutting back on meals. Told her we had extra bread every day. Funny how the ovens seem to make a little more than we need now. Her phone buzzed, another message from her boss. She turned it off. "Hard choices today," she read from a later entry. Sarah's college acceptance came, Ivy League, just like she wanted. "Martha says I'm crazy to sell the Mustang, but you can't drive memories to medical school. Besides, cars rust, education lasts." Sarah felt tears forming. She'd never gone to medical school, choosing business school instead. Jack cleared his throat. "The partners need answers. And there's something else. The employee ownership program could be a legal liability." Sarah barely heard him, turning to entries from recent years. "Mike's clinic opened today. My delivery boy's a doctor now. Jenny passed the bar exam. Her mother brought me tamales to celebrate. Robert's restaurant catered both events. Tom's teaching his own apprentice. Sometimes the best investment is just believing in someone." The final entry was dated just before Christmas. Sarah came by today. All she sees are outdated systems and missed opportunities. Wishes I could make her understand that not all profits show up on spreadsheets. Martha will protect things after I'm gone, but Sarah's the one who needs to understand. Left her a letter in the desk. Hope someday she'll be ready to read it. Sarah's head snapped up. "A letter? Martha, did you know about this?" But Martha was already pulling open the bottom desk drawer, reaching toward the back. She pulled out an envelope with Sarah's name on it. Jack stepped forward. "Before you open that, we really need to discuss the sale timeline." Sarah stood up. "Get out." "What? Both of you, please. I need to read this alone." After they left, Sarah sat in her grandfather's chair, holding the envelope. Through the window, she could see the empty parking spot where the Mustang used to sit. She opened the letter, hands shaking slightly, and began to read. "The secret community." Sarah read the letter 3 times before setting it down. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. The bakery isn't just a business, it's the heart of a living network of people helping people. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Robert Chen. "We need to talk," he said. "All of us." He led her to his restaurant where, to her surprise, dozens of people were waiting. Dr. Mike, Jenny Martinez, Thomas, and many others she recognized from her grandfather's photos and letters. "What is this?" Sarah asked. "We're Charles Anderson's network," Dr. Mike said, "and we need to show you how it works." One by one, they shared their stories. Jenny Martinez explained how she now provided free legal aid to families in need. Dr. Mike talked about his sliding-scale clinic fees. Robert Chen described how he offered free meals to struggling families. "Your grandfather taught us that success means lifting others as you climb," Jenny said. Sarah's phone buzzed. Jack again. She silenced it. Thomas stepped forward. The Christmas baskets weren't random. Charles used them to connect people who could help each other. "Last year," Robert added, "he made sure a basket went to a family whose daughter wanted to be a chef. Now she's apprenticing in my kitchen." Dr. Mike nodded. "The mother of that family works at my clinic now." Charles knew she had medical billing experience. "It's not charity," Jenny explained. "It's community investment. We all pay it forward." Sarah thought about the corporate efficiency models she'd learned in business school. None of them captured this. "But the costs," she said. "The bakery's margins." "Check last month's order volumes," Robert suggested. "Count how many businesses built from Charles's help now buy from the bakery." Martha, who had been quietly watching, handed Sarah a ledger. "Your grandfather called it the multiplication effect. Every person helped becomes a customer, then grows successful enough to help others, who also become customers. And those relationships matter more than money," Thomas added. "When flour prices rose last year, everyone here adjusted their budgets to accept the increase. Try getting that loyalty from a corporate contract." Sarah was beginning to understand, but then Jack burst in. "Sarah, we have a problem. Breadline Enterprises is threatening to pull their offer if we don't move forward immediately." The room went silent. "They're planning to close half the locations," Jack continued. "Centralize production, optimize delivery routes." "And what happens to all this?" Sarah gestured to the gathered community. "That's not our concern. We're here to sell a bakery, not run a charity." "No," Robert stood up. "You're here to dismantle something you don't understand." Sarah looked around the room, at the doctor who was once a delivery boy, the lawyer who grew up poor, the restaurant owner who nearly lost everything. "The Christmas baskets," she said suddenly. "They're due for assembly next week. The budget won't work with current costs," Jack said. "We should cancel." "We'll cover it," Dr. Mike interrupted. "All of us, whatever it takes." Others nodded in agreement. "That's not how business works," Jack protested. "Maybe not in New York," Sarah said quietly, "but it's how it works here." Her phone buzzed again, her boss demanding an answer about the sale. Sarah looked at the faces around her, each one part of her grandfather's carefully woven web of community support. She thought about his letter, about his vision of business as a force for good. "Jack," she said, "I think you should head back to New York." "Sarah, think about what you're doing." "I am," she replied. "For the first time, I really am." After Jack left, the room broke into quiet conversation. Sarah sat down with Martha, watching the community her grandfather had built. "He knew, didn't he?" she asked. "That someday I'd have to choose between two different ways of doing business." Martha smiled. "He believed you'd make the right choice when you saw the whole picture." Sarah picked up her phone to call her boss. It was time to make that choice. The succession dilemma. Sarah's call to her boss went exactly as she expected. "You're making a huge mistake," he said. "This is career suicide." "Maybe, but I'm not selling the bakery." "Then clean out your desk. Don't bother coming back." She hung up and turned to find Martha holding an envelope. "Your grandfather wanted you to have this after you made your choice," Martha said. Inside was a stock certificate dated 20 years ago, showing Charles had transferred his majority ownership to a community trust. He never actually owned enough shares to sell, Sarah realized. No one person does. That was the point. The bakery's front bell rang. Jack walked in with two men in suits. "Sarah," Jack said, "meet David Morris and James Klein from Breadline Enterprises. They've increased their offer by 40%. Sarah held up the stock certificate. The bakery isn't for sale. It legally can't be sold without community approval. We were afraid of something like this, Morris said. That's why we've been quietly buying shares from former employees over the past month. What? Sarah turned to Jack. Just doing my job, he shrugged. We're up to 30% ownership, another 10%, and we can force a vote. You've been planning this all along. It's business, Sarah, nothing personal. Martha stepped forward. You can't buy what's not for sale. Check those shares again. Klein pulled out his phone. According to our records, those shares are non-transferable without board approval, Martha interrupted. Check the fine print. Charles made sure of that. Sarah watched the executives reading, their faces darkening. This is ridiculous, Morris snapped. We'll challenge it in court. Go ahead, Sarah said. I'm sure the judge will love hearing how you tried to secretly buy up shares from elderly former employees. Jack loosened his tie. Sarah, be reasonable. This is your last chance at a graceful exit. No, Jack. This is your last chance to leave before I call Jenny Martinez. You remember her? The lawyer who specializes in corporate fraud? The front door opened again. Robert Chen walked in with Thomas and Dr. Mike. Everything okay here? Robert asked, but his eyes were steely. Morris looked around the room. This isn't over. Actually, it is, Sarah said. And Jack, the partners might be interested to know you were buying shares while representing the buyer. That's a clear conflict of interest. After they left, Sarah slumped into a chair. They'll be back with lawyers. Let them come, Jenny said from the doorway. I've been reviewing the trust documents. Your grandfather built an ironclad defense against corporate takeover. Martha pulled out an old letter. Charles knew this day would come. Here's his letter explaining the legal structure. Sarah read it, then smiled. He really did think of everything. The question is, Martha said, what do you want to do now? You've lost your job in New York. Sarah looked around at the community gathered in the bakery. She thought about her grandfather's diary, his vision of business as a force for good. I want to learn, she said. Really learn how all of this works. The margins are tight, Thomas warned. The old ways take more time, more effort. But they're worth it, Sarah said. I see that now. Her phone buzzed, a message from her old boss warning about burning bridges. Sarah turned the phone off. Where do we start? She asked Martha. First, we need to protect the Christmas basket program. Costs are up. Donations are down. I have some ideas about that, Robert said. As they gathered around a table to plan, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood. The simple joy of being part of something bigger than herself. She picked up her grandfather's diary and opened to a blank page. It was time to start writing her own chapter of the story. The true inheritance. 2 weeks after the confrontation with Breadline Enterprises, Sarah sat in the bakery office, surrounded by spreadsheets and planning documents. But these weren't corporate efficiency reports. They were the foundation of something new. The Charles Anderson Foundation, she explained to the gathered community board, a formal structure to continue what Grandpa built. Martha studied the proposal. How will it work? We'll combine the scholarship program, small business support, and community initiatives under one umbrella, but with proper documentation this time. Won't that expose everything your grandfather tried to keep quiet? Thomas asked. Times have changed, Sarah said. Being open about our community impact can inspire other businesses to follow our model. Dr. Mike nodded. And help with grant applications. My clinic could use a partner for our nutrition program. Sarah pulled up a spreadsheet. I've analyzed our costs. By modernizing our ordering system, but not our baking process, we can redirect 15% more to community programs. What about the corporate structure? Jenny asked. The bakery remains under the trust. The foundation will be separate, supporting the mission without risking the business. Robert Chen studied the numbers. This could work, but we'll need everyone's help. That's the best part, Sarah said. Everyone already helps, we're just making it official. She outlined the plans. Apprenticeship programs, small business mentoring, expanded education support. Everything her grandfather did, but structured to grow. There's something else, Martha said, pulling out a folder. Your grandfather left plans for expanding the Christmas basket program. Sarah opened the folder. Inside were detailed notes about reaching more families, connecting more communities. He wanted to double the program, Martha explained, but never had the organizational structure to do it. Now we do, Sarah said. She turned to Thomas. Can the ovens handle twice the volume? With a few adjustments, and my apprentices need the experience. Father Michael, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. Charles would be proud. You're not just preserving his work, you're growing it. But responsibly, Sarah added, every expansion has to support itself. I learned that much in business school. She pulled out her grandfather's diary. He wrote that true growth isn't about size, it's about impact. The meeting continued as they worked through details. Jenny offered legal support. Dr. Mike suggested healthcare partnerships. Robert proposed a restaurant training program. Martha watched it all with tears in her eyes. What is it? Sarah asked her later. You sound just like him now, but with your own twist. Sarah smiled. Corporate efficiency meets community values? Exactly. That evening, Sarah walked through the bakery. The ovens were cooling, but the scent of fresh bread lingered. Tomorrow's dough was rising in the proofing room, just as it had for 40 years. Her phone rang, a recruiter offering a position at another bank. Thanks, she said, but I have a job. Several, actually. After hanging up, she wrote in her grandfather's diary, Today we planted new seeds in the garden Grandpa built. The roots are strong, the foundation is solid. Now it's time to grow. She looked up at his photo on the wall. I finally understand, she said softly. Success isn't what you have, it's what you share. Martha found her there later, working on plans for the foundation's launch. Ready for tomorrow? She asked. The employee ownership meeting might be challenging. I'm ready, Sarah said. Grandpa taught me well, he just took his time doing it. She closed the diary and stood up. Through the window, she could see lights on at Robert's restaurant, where tomorrow's board meeting would take place. The true inheritance wasn't the bakery. It was the vision of what a business could be, and the responsibility to carry that vision forward. The spirit of Christmas. The week before Christmas, Sarah arrived at the bakery at 4 a.m., just as her grandfather had done for 40 years. The expanded Christmas basket program was about to face its first test. 400 baskets, Thomas announced. Double what we've ever done before. The baking team had been working in shifts since midnight. The scent of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls filled the air. The delivery schedule? Sarah asked. Volunteers are ready, Martha said. Dr. Mike's clinic staff, Robert's restaurant crew, even Jenny's law office, everyone's helping. Sarah checked her list. The foundation's launch had brought in new partners, expanding their reach to neighboring towns. The front bell rang. Sarah froze when she saw who entered. Jack Thompson. Impressive operation, he said, looking around. Shame it's about to end. What are you talking about? Jack pulled out a document. Remember those shares we bought? Turns out some weren't properly registered with the trust. That makes them independently transferable. Jenny reviewed all the paperwork. Jenny missed something. We now own 28% of controlling shares. And guess what? Breadline Enterprises just acquired a local bank, the one holding your business loans. Sarah felt her stomach drop. The Christmas baskets will be the last thing this bakery produces under Anderson management. Thomas stepped forward. Get out. Make me. In fact, the front bell rang again. Robert Chen walked in with Dr. Mike and a group of other business owners. Problem? Robert asked. Jack smiled, just explaining to Sarah how business works. Really? Jenny Martinez appeared from the back office. Because I'd love to explain how banking regulations work, especially regarding conflicts of interest in loan acquisitions. What are you talking about? The bank acquisition. Did Breadline Enterprises disclose their share buying scheme? Because that could be seen as market manipulation. Jack's smile faltered. Sarah stepped forward. Leave, Jack. You're not welcome here. This isn't over. Actually, Jenny said, it is. The SEC would be very interested in your activities. Want to risk your banking license? After Jack left, Sarah sat heavily in a chair. Will he really cause problems? No, Jenny said. I've already filed complaints with regulatory authorities. He's bluffing. Martha touched Sarah's shoulder. The baskets? Sarah stood up. Right, we have work to do. Throughout the day, volunteers streamed in. High school students packed boxes. Restaurant workers organized deliveries. Clinic staff coordinated recipient lists. Just like your grandfather planned it, Martha said, watching the activity. Sarah picked up a bread loaf, still warm. He knew, didn't he, that the baskets would bring everyone together? Every year, Thomas said. Though this year's special. Sarah looked around. Competitors worked side by side. Wealthy residents packed boxes next to those who'd received baskets last year. Her phone buzzed, a text from her old boss. Heard about Thompson's plan, still time to reconsider your options. She deleted it without responding. By evening, the first delivery reports came in. Stories of surprised families, grateful tears, new connections made. Your grandfather always said Christmas magic isn't about presents, Martha said. It's about presents. Sarah watched Robert's daughter teaching a recipient's son how to braid bread dough. Dr. Mike was arranging clinic visits for elderly recipients. Jenny was helping a single mother with legal paperwork. The real gift isn't in the baskets, Sarah realized. It's in the connections they create. She opened her grandfather's diary and wrote, "Today I learned that Christmas spirit isn't something you celebrate once a year. It's something you build every day, one relationship at a time." Outside, snow began to fall as the last deliveries headed out. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but tonight, in this moment, Sarah finally felt like she was truly home. "Merry Christmas, Grandpa," she whispered. "I get it now." The new beginning. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the bakery's main window, watching snow fall on another Christmas Eve in Millbrook. The Andersons' homemade bread sign now had a smaller addition underneath. Proud member of the Charles Anderson Foundation. 600 baskets this year, Thomas reported, checking his tablet, one of the few modernizations Sarah had implemented. All the new recipes are ready too. "How's the apprentice program going?" Sarah asked. 15 students now. Robert's daughter is top of the class. The bell rang as Martha entered, shaking off snow. "Just got off the phone with the Minneapolis group. They want to learn more about our community business model." Sarah smiled. In the past year, their story had spread. Other businesses were asking how they could replicate Charles's vision. "Did you show them the numbers?" Sarah asked. "Yes." They were surprised how profitable social impact can be when you measure it correctly. Sarah's phone buzzed, not her old boss this time, but a message from Jenny. The SEC had finally closed their investigation into Jack and Breadline Enterprises. The attempt to seize control of community-owned businesses through bank acquisitions was now illegal. "Your grandfather would have loved that," Martha said, reading over her shoulder. Sarah checked her watch. "Time for church?" "Just like every Christmas Eve," Martha nodded. At St. Mary's, Father Michael greeted them warmly. The pews were filled with familiar faces. Dr. Mike with his clinic staff, Robert and his family, Jenny and her law partners, and dozens of others whose lives had been touched by Charles's vision. After the service, they gathered at the bakery for the annual Christmas basket assembly. What once was a small operation now filled the entire main floor. "Remember last Christmas?" Thomas asked, watching volunteers work together. "When we thought we might lose everything. Turns out we gained something instead," Sarah replied. She walked through the organized chaos, stopping to help where needed. A young apprentice baker was teaching new volunteers how to pack boxes. Former basket recipients were now helping with deliveries. "Miss Anderson?" A teenage girl approached. "I just got accepted to college, the foundation scholarship." "What will you study?" Sarah asked. "Business and social entrepreneurship. I want to learn how to do what your grandfather did." Sarah hugged her, remembering her own journey from corporate ambition to understanding true success. Martha found her later in the office, reviewing next year's plans. "Found something in the old files," Martha said, holding out a sealed envelope. "Charles left instructions to give it to you once the foundation was established." Sarah opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single page. "Dear Sarah, if you're reading this, you've discovered what I always knew. That business isn't just about making money, it's about making a difference. The foundation isn't just my legacy, it's your beginning. Take what I built and make it grow, not in size but in impact. And remember, success isn't counted in dollars, but in lives changed. Love, Grandpa. P.S. The Mustang wouldn't have suited you anyway." Sarah laughed through tears, looking at his photo on the wall. Outside, the first delivery vans were loading up. Tomorrow, hundreds of families would wake up to fresh bread and hope. But more importantly, they'd wake up connected to a community that cared. Her phone buzzed one last time, a job offer from a prestigious consulting firm. Sarah declined without hesitation. She already had the best job in the world. "Ready for the deliveries?" Martha asked. "Ready," Sarah said, picking up her coat. But first, she opened her grandfather's diary and wrote, "1 year later, and the garden keeps growing. Every seed planted yields a harvest of hope. The numbers add up differently now, measured in smiles, in futures brightened, in communities strengthened." Grandpa was right. Some things aren't for sale because their value can't be measured in money. They can only be measured in love. Outside, the snow kept falling on Millbrook, coating everything in pristine white. But inside Anderson's bakery, the warmth of community, of purpose, of love, that would last long after the snow melted, just as Charles had planned all along. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story about love, family values, and the true meaning of success, please hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Sarah's position? Maybe you have your own story about choosing between money and what really matters in life. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more touching stories that remind us of life's most important lessons. Remember, the richest legacy we can leave isn't in our bank accounts, but in the lives we touch along the way.